It's not my office, so I don't feel like I can come in here.
How are we doing?
So the conference number isn't wrong for some reason.
Oh,
But
okay.
I don't think,
All right. Well, I'm going to record it on video here in case you want to. Even better. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You let me know when you're ready, and I can I get you something to drink?
Ice water. And then what do you think? What, 2 or 3 more minutes? Make sure they get or I can give them. I can let them do the survey first. Maybe that helps.
That's good. Yeah. I'm gonna. Well, I was gonna introduce you.
Yeah.
So let me do that, and then hey everyone. Hello. We're gonna get started in a few minutes. So if I could just have your attention. The conference room number isn't working. Not that you guys can do anything about that or you care. But anyway, we're going to be recording things. So just know that that's going on. It's mostly Andrew recording himself. So we can make this available to other people around the world, this talk. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Andrew Lee, who has been one of our partners for a long time now. He's a local Wikimedian. There's a DC chapter, and he's also an American University professor and teaches on collaborative knowledge. So he's been around, he's been a familiar face at the Smithsonian for a number of years now. He brings his classes to our various museums and research centers to do Wikimedia edit-a-thons. Stand out of the light. I'd also like to introduce, and I'm sorry, you're about to take a bite. This is Ariel Citroni.
Citron, yep.
Citron. She is new to Wikimedia DC. They now have a full-time person who's helping to coordinate events at cultural heritage institutions and other organizations around DC. Personally, I'm super excited to have Andrew here to talk about Wikidata. I think this is a project that is really going to allow us to, at a new and really big scale, participate in Wikipedia. We've been doing edit-a-thons for years, and that's wonderful in terms of building a volunteer base and friends of the Smithsonian, but Wikidata is really going to be a game changer for us. Just a little heads up that I'm working on a pilot project with Wikidata with the Smithsonian Archives, with the libraries, with Natural History Museum and American History. And if anyone wants more information, please get in touch with me. I'm Effie Capsalis. I should introduce myself since I don't know a lot of faces. I'm at the Archives. I'm the Chief of Content and Communication Strategy there. So Andrew's going to have you get started with a brief survey if you have a laptop.
Or cell phone.
Or cell phone.
Yes.
And if you don't have either, do it later.
That's okay. Do
Write
it later.
down. Yeah?
Yes. Good.
And I'll figure out the conference call. So
Great.
welcome, Andrew.
Okay, thanks so much. It's a very easy link here. It's bit.ly/SI Wikidata survey, all lowercase, pretty simple. So it's only like 4 questions. It's all just a slider and a checkbox. But that helps us kind of gauge what your experience level is with Wikipedia and Wikidata. No names, we just want to kind of get the basic feel there. So if you can do that now, that'd be great. I'll remind you also maybe about 20 minutes for folks who come in late, or if you don't have a computer in front of you, you can do that again. You can also access all the slides that I have up here if you go to bit.ly/SI Wikidata 2017. And I hope there will be a 2017 A, B, C, D as we do more of these talks. But this is our first ever Wikidata talk to the greater staff of the Smithsonian. We're really excited to do this. And yeah, I wonder if we could just do this very quickly. If you could just say who you are, who you represent, and maybe some kind of project you're excited about, whether it's Wikidata related or not. You have a lot of stuff going on. I think American History just opened up something this week. You got the Folk Life Festival. There's so much great stuff going on. I'd like to know something a little bit more about you as well. So why don't we start on this end, and if you could tell us your name, affiliation, and something interesting you're working on.
So my name is Diana Gabler. I'm currently a Mellon Fellow, my second year in Objects Conservation at the National Museum of the American Indian, and I'm working with Objects Conservator Kelly McHugh on a permanent exhibition called Americans.
Nice.
I'm Megan Farrader. I'm with the Smithsonian Transcription Center. Recently, I've been working with Effie Capsalis to evaluate some of our effectiveness in our editathons and some other interesting things we can try and do, short engagements online, engaging with some of our online volunteers who are already working on transcription and collaborating with other projects like Biodiversity Heritage Center.
As Effie said, my name is Ariel Citron. I'm with Wikimedia DC, and I was brought to the Wikimedia team as the Institutional Partnerships Manager, and I'm here after the event, or at any time you can reach me to organize any sort of editathon or other Wikimedia event that you would like to do at your office or facility.
I'm Diane Shaw from the library, so we're a book cataloger, but I'm also on the board of directors for Wikimedia DC, and I'm also excited about trying to get more Wikipedia-related events going on at the Smithsonian. So, you know, if you're interested, let me know, and I can also contact Ariel.
I'm Suzanne Pilsk. I'm also in the libraries, and I am one of the founding underground members of a, don't tell anyone, linked data group at Smithsonian, where we're trying to figure out how we can use linked data, either linked open data or just linked data internally and externally. So those are one of the things I'm keen on.
I'm Valerie Kaufman. I'm from American History. I'm interning with Amanda Moniz from Philanthropy there. And we're working on ways to get a sort of crowdsourcing thing going on a census of statues of American philanthropists. So we're looking at that.
Hi everyone, I'm Savannah Jolks. I am a new intern over at Kursaka. I'm filling in for Ryan Payne, who's out sick today. And I am helping transfer content over from our old website to our new website.
My name is Jared Smith. I'm with History and Culture, and I'm the Digital Asset Manager. And I'm here to learn exactly how we could possibly get involved with using it for our purposes.
Hi, I'm Courtney Youth. I'm a cataloger of African American history and culture, and I've been doing a lot of work cataloging our oral history collection.
I'm Dina Herbert. I'm an interloper. I work at the National Archives. And so thanks for letting me join in. Big Smithsonian fan. I work for SNAC, which is Social Networks and Archival Context with Smithsonian, is a member of the cooperative. And so our information is in Wikidata, and I'm interested in seeing how we can continue, how I can learn more about Wikidata so we can continue to add more name authorities.
I'm Tess Christensen. I'm a cataloger at African American History and Culture. I'm interested in seeing how this could be used more for this project. I'm Rebecca Snyder. I'm with Natural History in our informatics office. I'm responsible for how our data moves around both within the Smithsonian and globally, so we anticipated to do this in our bio. I'm also working with Effie for the pilot project for Natural History, and then also part of the unintentionally secretive data group.
I'm Carol Lewis, and I'm the Collections Information System Administrator at NMAI. And working on everyday things like email upgrades and things like that, but also we're working on revamping our collections, like website, and also working on collaboration with some other institutions to better incorporate archival materials into Kindle and some data that's come up with there. My name is Susan Gill. I'm also from the National Museum of the American Indian. I'm the textile conservator. And we're going to be reworking our portion of the website, and we just want to get more information and research out there.
I'm Rick Ferrante. I'm the Digital Services Director at SR Archives. We have a number of big projects going on involving digitization. We also need more digitalization. So I'm very interested in how to connect those things. Primary source.
I'm Joel Reeshardt. I'm the head of web services at the library, so I work with Diane and Suzanne down there. I'm a vested interest in the data because we're publishing books and stuff online. And some of the data that we have might be suitable to give to Wikidata.
I'm Charles Nagy, I'm the digital imaging tech at SIA with Rick, and I'm very new to Wikidata and looking forward to learning more.
I'm Sarah Oakman. I'm the American History Museum. I'm a collections manager for photographic history. And mostly I work on trying to get my head around 250,000 accounts. I'm Holly Rowe. I'm the paleobiology department, the informatics specialist in that department, natural history, and I'm working a lot on how we share our data and implement data standards.
I'm Diane Zorich. I'm the director of the Digitization Program Office, which is the central office at the Smithsonian, charged with increasing the quality, quantity, and impact of Smithsonian digitized collections. Interested in how Wikipedia can do that. And Suzanne, I think I'm the only one.
No, I didn't say I wasn't the only one. I said I was just part of one.
The artisans are exclusive.
I know, they're there.
I'm Bob Burton from American History. Suddenly faced with a whole variety of different data opportunities, and so anxious to learn more about them.
Great.
I'm Charlene Smith, and I just retired and moved from Seattle, where I worked in high tech for multiple years. And I'm now a volunteer downstairs at the Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage. I'm in the archives, and I'm very interested in seeing how, and I've written several articles in Wikipedia, for Wikipedia, in Wikipedia, and I'm interested in seeing how the Center for Folk Life and Archives can connect their information better both on the outside and within the institutions. And I'm brand new, so there's a whole lot I don't know yet, but I've spent my professional life working in databases, and I'm curious. What can we do? And they're all archivists and librarians, and they sit me.
Right.
Eric Kersley, volunteer in science and medicine in the American History Museum.
Great.
I'm Darren Milligan at the Center for Learning and Digital Access, and I'm the project director of something called the Smithsonian Learning Lab, which is a digital toolkit that sits on top of all of our digital and digitized resources from across the 19 museums and research centers and other offices. And the platform encourages the creative and educational reuse of our material by teachers and students and anybody.
Great. I think we have the other backstrip there.
Hi, I'm Jessica Warner, and I'm a senior program officer with the Digitization Program Office, and I'm here to eavesdrop and listen.
Hi, I'm Megan Birdie. I'm an archivist in the Digital Operations Department at the Archives of American Art. I'm interested in learning more about Untitled Data because we're participating in the American Art Collaborative right now, and I'm just starting to learn about it.
Great.
I'm Pam Hansen, historian for the history of the Smithsonian at the Center Archive, and do a lot of create a lot of data about the Smithsonian, like to put it out in a variety of ways.
I'm Karen Rice. I'm the Archives of American Art, Digital Operations Department, and I'm working on the American Art Collaborative and Open Data Project, where specifically with Wikidata, there's the potential to use some tools that have been developed for that to link and match our names and other headings to possibly to Wikidata. Right now we're using ULAN, the Union List of Artists' Names, but the idea would be hopefully maybe to broaden that and be able to see if names in our database as linked open data are matched to Wikidata.
Great.
Hi, I'm Toby Rader, also from the Archives of American Art. I'm the developer, so I'm mostly interested in kind of from a tool and technology-based standpoint of understanding how the infrastructure Wikidata can be used for doing some of this linked open data kind of infrastructure.
Great.
Rebecca.
Okay, great.
Hi, sorry to be joining a little late. I'm Rebecca Wall. I'm from the Office of International Relations. I'm really interested in, I'm a total novice to Wikidata, so I'm really interested to just, learn more and sort of wrap my head around this. And a lot of our institutional partners overseas and also smaller NGOs and smaller museums, regional museums, are using Wikidata as a way of putting their information out there and also sort of controlling the narratives about their spaces. So I'm also thinking about ways that we could maybe as an institution connect with those kinds of processes in our international partnerships.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the introductions. It really helps me kind of get a feel for what types of projects you're working on. I think it's really useful for you folks to also see what your colleagues and maybe partners outside Smithsonian are doing as well. I thought I'd mention two things before I forget. One is that there actually is a Wikidata Con, the first Wikidata conference ever, coming up in the fall. I need to find out the exact date. Maybe, Ariel, you can Google that real quick. But it's in Berlin, Germany. It's a pretty big deal since the first time that there is a conference just about Wikidata. It's gotten that big and that important around the world. And we just came off of a recent conference in Europe called WikiCite, which is very much related to Wikidata. And imagining a world where citations don't just exist in your Microsoft Word document or in your footnotes, and that when you insert a citation, you get the best citation that has been screened and checked and verified by people all around the world, the same way that Wikipedia has citations. You can now kind of grab them and quickly use them in your documents in your sites. So that's a project called WikiCite. We had just had a conference a few months ago, and Wikidata is the basis of that system to allow for universal citations to be used around the net.
It's October 28th and 29th.
October 28th and 29th in Berlin. Thank you, Ariel. All right, so just to remind you, if you came in late, if you could go to bit.ly/SI Wikidata survey, just to fill out a very quick survey on your mobile or laptop. It only takes about 15, 20 seconds. And then all the slides here are also on SI Wikidata 2017. And I will also leave my contact information at the end when we do questions and answers. But again, as we announced in this session, I'm glad we got such a great response, even though we want to give more than 1 week notice, but there's a lot of interest, so it's a good thing we actually didn't give too much notice for this. We really assume no knowledge about Wikidata, and even if you know something about Wikidata, I'm sure you'll learn some interesting new things that you probably didn't know before about the origins of Wikidata. So just very quickly about me, I've written a book about Wikipedia called The Wikipedia Revolution. If you really want to know the deep, dark history of Wikipedia, you can read that book. I have been a curatorial consultant to the Computer History Museum. There actually is a mini exhibit about Wikipedia at the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley right now, and I help assemble part of that. And just to, sometimes you'll hear me refer to kind of my experiences in database design kind of from yesteryear. In 1995, I worked with the Pulitzer Prize organization to put all the Pulitzers as a database online, because previously, believe it or not, it was only in a printed manual. They did not even have it in a spreadsheet form. So designing that database for 100 years worth of content was kind of interesting, and I'll maybe describe some of my experiences with that process and Wikidata as well. Dina there is the manager of this space at the National Archives. There is actually now a full-time exhibit about Wikipedia at the National Archives that Dina and I had worked on. One of those panels is here, you can see, talking about some of the Wikipedia collaboration we've had in DC and other places. So if you're ever there at the National Archives, please feel free to drop by and take a look at the innovation lab that Dina has been so instrumental in creating. So I think most of you are familiar with the acronym GLAM, or sometimes LAM. We've worked with all three parts of LAM here in DC. We just recently did a Wikidata session with the Library of Congress, so some of my examples will talk about some things that we did with them that were quite interesting. But Wikimedia DC is a local organization. Diane is on the board of it. Effie's been working with us. Sarah Snyder at American Art Museum has been working very closely, so we look forward to more of these type of events if we want to go deeper into some of the content that we're talking about today. So I'd like to describe Wikidata as the evolution of Wikipedia into the ultimate free linked open database. And it's kind of not the best description. It's not just evolving Wikipedia. People are jumping into Wikidata who've never done anything with Wikipedia and just using it as the central store for identifiers and authority control records. It's really quite interesting to see how Wikidata has become a whole new hub of activity on its own. So what we're going to talk about today is the motivation for Wikidata, how it was designed, what are some of the features, and we're going to learn the acronym RDF. If you don't know about that, that's fine. We'll describe what that is. And then we'll talk about how you actually interact with it. How do you make queries against Wikidata? What are some of the tools? And we'll talk about some case studies that we've had in working with Library of Congress and some other folks on how to effectively use Wikidata for interesting projects. And then we'll also have a hands-on session where we'll actually have you help fix some of the very undeveloped entries in Wikidata about your museums. They're really quite skimpy. And in probably 15 minutes, we can make them much better by you just going in there and adding descriptions and the fact that, hey, the Museum of American History is actually part of the Smithsonian institution. That's actually not modeled right now in Wikidata. So very simple things we can do to get the ball rolling on making the entries better in Wikidata. So just a quick background, there are more than 5 million English language articles in Wikipedia right now. It's one of the top 10 most visited websites in the entire world. And it's gotten to the point where after 16, 17 years of existence, it's now used a lot in these collaborations with GLAM institutions around the world. So what are the challenges of Wikipedia being this big? And that's where Wikidata comes in, right? So one of the problems is that although Wikipedia English that you probably use all the time looks like it's big and complete, quote unquote, at 5 million, there are actually 30 million articles across the 200-some languages of Wikipedia. There are great reams of content in German, French, Spanish that we just never get to read in English Wikipedia because we're centered on the English language, right? So there are inconsistencies, gaps, and replication all around Wikipedia because we kind of sequestered ourselves into these language groups on Wikipedia. So what if there was a way to share that information? And basically anything that's not language dependent, what if we could share facts, figures, numbers, dates, things that are not dependent on English, Spanish, or French, for example. So how do we consolidate these noble facts? And that's the motivation for Wikidata. And we kind of take this cue from what happened back in 2004. So I don't know if you were using Wikipedia back then, but in 2001 when Wikipedia was launched, if you wrote an article about Smithsonian Institution and you uploaded a picture of the outside of the Smithsonian Castle, that picture was only in English Wikipedia. If a German writer was writing the German language article about the Smithsonian Castle, they'd have to find a picture or download it from English language Wikipedia and upload it back in to German Wikipedia. Not very efficient, right? So that's why Wikimedia Commons as a central location for images and multimedia was created. So when one person takes a picture of the Smithsonian Castle, they upload to Commons, then anyone writing an article about Wikipedia in Wikipedia about the Smithsonian Castle could just bring that image into the Wikipedia article, right? So that was the motivation for centralizing multimedia and images. So now that's the motivation for centralizing data and knowable facts into structured content on Wikidata, right? So you'll hear about this idea that Wikidata is about structured data. It is not just free-form stuff you read on the screen. You actually understand that that number is a date, or that number is a population, or that number is longitude and latitude, right? So we're trying to turn what is human readable on Wikipedia into machine understandable, right? So if you've seen the information box on the right-hand side, we kind of have nice markup for what looks like a coordinate or markup for what looks like a date. But Wikipedia really doesn't know much more about it than that's a 5, that's a 6, that's a 7. It really doesn't know that that's 5 feet, or that's 10 meters, or that's 100 yards, right? So that's what we want to do with Wikidata, right? So this is what you often hear about on the net as the semantic web realized, right? Trying to put meaning into these numbers, meaning into these concepts. So here's a good example that we worked on recently with Library of Congress. So if we look at the Wikipedia article for United States Congress, you'll see that there are things that we know about Congress by reading this as human beings, but they're not really modeled in Wikipedia, right? We know that Congress is a bicameral legislature. It's part of the federal government. It meets in the Capitol building, and those coordinates are right here in longitude and latitude. So they look really nice on this page. If you click on it, it might bring you to Google Maps, but it really doesn't do much more than that right now. You can see in the info box, they model some of that there. If I go to the bottom of the article, you'll see that these navigation boxes at the bottom of Wikipedia articles also tell us a lot about other things in sets and groups and categories, right? That you can actually look at all the members and leaders of Congress. You can look at the different caucuses right here, and there's different committees, right? But these are just HTML pointers to other pages. There's not much more you can do in terms of following these and doing math and set addition and subtraction on these things. So what we'd like to do is have a way to do that. That's where Wikidata comes in. So Wikidata was launched in 2012, And it was meant to bring the power of searching, sorting, and querying to all these little statements, or these claims, or these factual claims in Wikipedia articles, right? Because right now they're just sentences, text on the page. So I'd like to say that, Wikipedia always described itself as just the sum of all human knowledge. And I'd like to kind of amend that to we're not just gathering stuff, we are becoming the interconnected mesh of all human knowledge, right? So Wikidata doesn't need to contain all this information. It can actually point out and just be the central hub pointing to all these records out there. And some of you already work with Wikidata know what has been done already with putting in identifiers pointing to SAM and to SIA. So in Wikidata, and this is not just Wikidata specific, anytime you've heard of like RDF or no SQL models, this is what we talk about, is that we talk about any type of claim or factual statement in a Wikipedia article or anywhere in the world as an example of what we call subject, predicate, object. This can also be viewed as some item has a property and this is their value, right? So the Capitol building has a height of so many feet. If you just want to bring it down to the most simplest thing in the world, it's thing, relationship, thing. Something has a relationship to something else. And that's the most basic thing you have in Wikidata. So what does this actually look like when we look in Wikidata? Well, you'll see some weird terminology that we use. There are two types of things in Wikidata. There are Q items and there are P items. Okay, I think the person who created Wikidata is a German. I don't think he really knew the English phrase of mind your P's and Q's, but it just happens to be really, really good coincidence. That's P's and Q's. So we have Q items in Wikipedia, which are just things, items, that pretty much correspond to one Wikipedia article, right? So anyone can make a Q item on Wikidata. I can go on right now and make a new Q item. If it doesn't collide with something that exists already, I can just say make new item. I want to call it, the tree 5 feet away from this building, and that's a distinct object that I can make on Wikidata. So some examples of Q numbers, probably out of fun. The first thing ever is the universe. So Q1 is the universe, which kind of makes sense. Q2 is the Earth. We're very Earth-centric. I'm not sure why it's not the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, whatever. But Q5 is human. So if you go to Wikidata and look up what is Q number 5, it's human. Q146 is a cat. Q729 is an animal. Q513, so these are just examples of Mount Everest. And in Smithsonian, unfortunately, it was done quite late in the game. So it's Q131626. Well, it's actually really easy to remember. Look at that. It's 131, and then you have a 626. So if you remember that, you know the Q numbers. The good thing is that we don't have to deal with Q numbers that much. Because we're human beings, we don't like all these numbers, we can deal with the labels, which you see there. And then we also have properties, right? So remember, these Q numbers go here, and then Q items have properties. So what are some properties? Well, you could have the date of birth of something, you could have the coordinate location, the VIAF ID, so anyone who works in libraries knows that VIAF is the identifier that OCLC maintains. It's kind of the universal identifier for bibliographic objects, right? So properties are very controlled. Right? So Q numbers anyone can make, but we want to try to control the P numbers because we don't want people to say date of birth or day when I was born. And we want to kind of make sure that when you look for date of birth, we kind of know what you're talking about, right? So the P numbers are tightly controlled. There's a whole proposal process, discussion, and approval for making sure that we tightly control the P number, but everything else kind of is freewheeling, right? So some examples of the most important ones, we'll be talking a lot about instance of or subclass of. Anyone's ever dealt with database design or ontologies or taxonomy knows the biggest debate ever. Is something a subclass of something or something an instance of something, right? And we have those battles every day in Wikidata, for better or for worse. If you want to take a look at all the properties, you can actually go and look at all the properties there. But that's just the basics. Everything else is built on these two concepts of items and properties. So here's an example of what a Wikidata page looks like for George Washington, let's say. Right? So in the upper left-hand corner, you can see George Washington's Q23, pretty important guy, it seems. You can put in a description right here, which says first president of the United States. And then these are statements, right? So Q23, here's the property, and here's the value, right? He's the instance of a human being, part of the founding fathers of the United States. His image is at this URL. Sex or gender, male. So his page is really long, just all these statements, taking what is in his Wikipedia article, written in human prose, but breaking it down into what we call triples, right? Item, property value, item property value, over and over and over again. Right? There's a reason why we like this. The reason why we like this is because it's just math, right? So if we say Q23 is George Washington, he's an instance of a human, it's just Q23, P31, Q5, right? That is the underlying representation in Wikidata. And then the cool thing is that, what is George Washington in French, in Arabic, in Chinese? Well, we can translate later, but all I know is that this relationship here sticks, and you can translate all the other stuff on top of it, right? We also see that George Washington's place of burial is Mount Vernon. So you can see Mount Vernon has this big number here. Place of burial is property P119. And then here's another example of how there's a special set of properties which are identifiers, right? Just pointing to other databases. So here, for example, the Library of Congress auth ID, Q23, P244, and this is the index into the Library of Congress. It's just a string. And you just kind of plop it into the Library of Congress URL, and boom, you're off to the races. You get to see all they have about George Washington. Okay, so we'll take a look a little bit later about how long these identifiers can get. But this is just a basic set of statements, what we call triples, right? Item, property, value for the person that we're looking at here. So how do you find the Wikidata item? Well, you probably never noticed this before because it's hiding down here. When you're looking at a Wikipedia article, right down here, Wikidata item. Yeah, we're hiding in plain sight. I think if you do eye tracking studies, that's like the least likely place you'd ever look. But go down there and take a look down there, and you will find that. Right? So it can get a little bit dizzying because you're like, I've got so many edit buttons and references and all this. But they're trying to just give you a place to affect change where it makes sense. Rather than hitting the edit button, then having to scroll down, you can actually say, I want to add something as an instance of, I want to modify this. So there's a lot of buttons, but just be aware that you can click any of these and just edit right in place. Okay. So United States Congress is the item, right? As we said, that is the property instance of, and then it's a bicameral legislature. And the cool thing is we don't have to know the underlying parts. It's all kind of hidden to us, but this is what is represented in the database below the surface. And the cool thing is I'm looking at it in English, someone else can like flip it to French, Spanish, German, whatever, and all these relationships still stick. The interface will be translated, bicameral legislature will be translated, or George Washington will be, not George Washington, United States Congress will be translated, and it's kind of cool that I could add it in English, but it'll benefit anyone in any language because it's semantic content stored below. All right, so as we said, these are what we call triples. They're called claims or statements. And the cool thing is that relationships are what we call first-class items in our database. We'll talk in a second about how the traditional databases you're used to, like relational databases or spreadsheets, don't really have relationships as part of their vocabulary. But in Wikidata and RDF, as we're going to talk about, they have it as first-class items. So it can take seconds to search Wikidata versus minutes. If you have 5, 10, 15, 20 tables, we need to store like paintings and artists and date of birth and locations and museums, they're all just pointing to each other in Wikidata. And we've seen queries that search all 35 million entries, 27 million entries in about half a second, which is pretty amazing. Right? So let's take a look and see, that the ad hoc data model that we have in Wikidata is really great for the wiki way. There's really no way you could do a database in the wiki way of just being bold and just jumping in and just adding stuff here and there. It might be complete, it might not be complete. You really couldn't do that any other way other than the triples method, right? So for example, traditional databases, you have schemas that are very well defined and very controlled, right? So anyone who's ever worked with very strict taxonomies or with the Getty thesaurus, things like that. They have very rigid tables. If you want to add a new column, oh my gosh, everyone's got to sit down and talk, and there's major implications. If you're missing content, we just had a edit-a-thon with the American Art Museum a few years ago saying it was Black History Month. Let's get a list of all the African-American artists. Sorry, that's not a column in our database. We can't figure that out. Oops. So you can actually link that into Wikidata and find that out with other databases, but if you have rich databases like this, it's kind of hard to get that information, right? So relational databases and SQL, which are kind of the norm for the last 20, 30 years, has been yielding to a lot more work with things like Wikidata, folks that deal with triples and triple stores. Okay, so searches on these type of databases can be slow, and if you try to look at what this content here looks like if you model it with something like Wikidata, it'd be something like this, right? So you don't really see relationships across these tables explicitly, but in RDF and with Wikidata you do, right? So you say Edward Hopper is a citizen of the United States, his date of birth is July 22nd, Nighthawks is a painting, it was created by Edward Hopper, it's an instance of a painting which is a subclass of creative work. So this is basically the underlying structure of Wikidata, right? So it's really fast and easy to say, show me all creative works painted by people born in July of 1882. Fast, boom, you can get it right back. So that's something really cool about Wikidata, right? So it can take any shape and grow according to need, but it's not all a win-win, right? So there are some upsides, there are some downsides. The upsides is that these triples make a very flexible and fast system. You don't have to figure it all out right now. You can upload partial information. You can kind of grow it and evolve it as you move forward. It's very suitable for the wiki culture that we have, which is sporadic donations of content or additions of content. And the great thing is that multiple parallel ontologies can coexist, right? So you're working on armament and arms, I'm working on paintings, she's working on buildings, and we can all have different ways of classifying things. The downsides of something like this is that the schema on the fly, as we say, that not having to define all these rigid columns can be really, really confusing, right? So we do have the situation right now in Wikidata, which is, do we say that the Smithsonian American Art Museum is part of the Smithsonian Institution, or is it a subsidiary of the Smithsonian Institution, or is it something else? We actually have 4 or 5 different properties we could use, but people in Germany are using one way, people in France are doing another thing, people in China are doing another thing, and we're kind of scratching our heads saying, wow, we should probably get this all together at some point, but we're not really sure how to do that. So the beauty of the Wiki Way and the RDF triples is we can move forward very quickly. The problem is trying to consolidate them all. We still have that problem. So that is also the exact same thing that's an upside is the downside. Multiple parallel, probably conflicting ontologies can coexist, but aren't good for findability and for database operations. So that is the big challenge, and it's not obvious it'll ever come together to be anything close to perfect, but it's an interesting experiment we're running right now to try to get them together. All right. So what's the benefit of Wikidata? Using identifiers removes the language dependence and ambiguity. You're, I don't want to say impervious to, but you're mitigating the problems of writing systems, of phoneticization, spelling variations, and maiden versus married names. So if someone gets married and they change their last name, Wikidata's fine, perfect. We'll just add it as another name that we know this person by, but the underlying Q number is the same, right? That's not the case right now in Wikipedia. Things get lost. So for example, Muammar Gaddafi, there's 53 variations of the spelling of his name. Wikidata's perfectly fine with it. Wikidata's like, give me another 53 if you want. We can deal with it, right? Not easy in Wikipedia when you deal with lexical descriptions, right? So Wikidata now has 27 million items. Simple searches can take less than a second. That's great. Complex queries supported by standards like Sparkle. So how many people here have heard of Sparkle before? How many people have used Sparkle? Yeah, it's a little bit wonky. It's a little bit tough to know how to use if you're used to other database languages. So we're going to give you a very basic introduction to it today. Yeah, so this is already Sparkle, if you believe it or not. So we already saw that Library of Congress is an instance of a bicameral legislature. Sparkle is the language you use to query databases that hold these RDF triples. Sparkle is a standard. We just happen to use it in kind of a hyper way of, using it with our content. And what you can do is just say, instance of bicameral legislatures, and then you put a question mark in a word, and that's a variable. It's basically just saying X, like in algebra, saying, I don't know what legislatures are out there. Could you tell me what they are, right? So you just put in question mark legislature, and then this is Wikidata, P31, Wikidata, Q1894445. So if anyone knows anything about Sparkle, Sparkle's very generic. It's not specific to Wikipedia, it's not specific to Library of Congress, not specific to Smithsonian, which makes it really powerful but kind of clunky because you need to kind of teach it a lot of stuff about what we're doing with Wikidata beforehand. I'll show you in a second what this looks like. But what you can do with this simple statement here is get back something like that, which is cool. Right? So you ask Wikidata how many things out there or how many items have property of bicameral legislature, And this one brought back 74 results. It looked at all 27 million things, came back in 330 milliseconds. Pretty wild, right? So you can see that this is really not complete. There's more than 74. In fact, last month there were 74. I checked yesterday, it's 113. So people are starting to add. You can really never depend on Wikidata to be complete unless you really look into the data. But this is what it brought back. I also asked for the country label to see, what countries are we talking about. And you can see some of these are municipal and state level, some are national level right there. So that's a very simple query. And as I mentioned before, one of the special properties that we have for Wikidata are identifiers. So for folks working in libraries, museums, and archives, this should really excite you, right? So that when you see a Wikidata item, you can say, oh, we've got stuff about that. Just link your identifier in. So for example, Barack Obama has 83 identifiers. So these are things that says, it's just a pointer to another database on the internet. One of those is VIAF. VIAF is one of the significant ones. And you can see that VIAF actually links back to Wikidata. So these are all national libraries that VIAF says, oh, you have content that's worth pointing to. Wikidata is, in fact, among all these national libraries and national archives now, which is pretty impressive. But look at how many VIAF has. VIAF has maybe, 20 or 30? Wikidata is 83 for Barack Obama. So Wikidata is quickly becoming the most populated hub of pointers to other databases on the net. Right, so here's just an example of some of those identifiers that are in the Barack Obama Wikidata item pointing to other things. And as Dina said, SNAC right here, social networks, archival context. You might see some other ones there that you recognize, but even some that you wouldn't quite consider library grade, let's say, like New York Times topic ID. We recently imported pointers to Quora.com. So Quora.com is a question and answer site on the internet, and we now point to the topics in Quora that are related to the person on Wikidata. So these are just a sample of the types of things. You can see very international, all different types of walks of life for these pointers here. These are the, I think, 4 identifiers related to Smithsonian. Does this sound right, Effie? These are the only 4 that I could find. So it's Cooper Hewitt Person ID, SAM, which we worked with Sarah Snyder, Smithsonian Trinomial, and then a volcano ID. Right. But there probably should be many, many more here if we can work on it. So once we can sit down and find out the best way to model these in Wikidata, we should add more. But these are the ones that you can find right now as identifiers that we now record in Wikidata. So what are some of the benefits of Wikidata? Well, once you understand numbers and scale and balance checking, things like that in a database, you can do all kinds of cool things you cannot do in Wikipedia. So right now in Wikipedia, you can have a birth date that is after the death date of someone, and it's just vandalism, and you have to kind of look by eye to figure that out. The cool thing in Wikidata is it can do math, it can do logic, so it has what we call constraint reports and constraint violations. So when you enter information, or when you're browsing stuff, you can actually see these warnings. And right here you can see ISBN publisher prefix property should be an instance of publisher, but Smithsonian Institution currently isn't listed as a publisher in Wikidata, which you're thinking, oh, that's probably something we should fix. Right, so someone added Smithsonian Institution in Wikidata and said it's a museum, it's an archive, it's a library, but maybe someone didn't put in that it's a publisher of works. It is. So this is a good reminder to click on this and go add one of the subclasses of Smithsonian Institution as a publisher. In fact, it's a music publisher, it's a book publisher, it's all kinds of things. Right? So these are the kinds of things that are not hard things in Wikidata blocking you from stuff, but they will remind you and nudge you and say, these are things we think are wrong because we know better. That you should be born before you die. That you should, if you're publishing something, you should be listed as a publisher, and the internal logic of Wikidata works better when all these constraints are fulfilled. Right? So how do you edit Wikidata? Pretty easy if you've ever seen it. Just look for these 2 buttons, edit and add. So here's a good example of 2 different articles or 2 different entries. Unfortunately, David Scorton's needs more translation. His article is only in English and German, so we need other folks from other languages to start translating his article over there. But Smithsonian Institution, 56 different languages have a full article about Smithsonian Institution. So the first role of Wikidata when it launched in 2012 was to just be a central hub for pointing to all the other language articles in Wikipedia. So this used to be hand edited, believe it or not. So if you want to point to the German article about David Skorton from English, you have to add it by hand to the English language article and add the reverse link by hand as well. These are now centralized in Wikidata. That was kind of the first mission of Wikidata. So properties as identifiers. So as I mentioned, Barack Obama had 83, maybe more than that now. They're just indexes into other databases, authority control record, accession numbers, catalog identifiers, and then if there's a stable URL that points into the collection of another organization, that's something valid to be produced as an identifier in Wikidata. So you can see some of these here for Edward Hopper, the artist, are all listed here in a nice display. So how do we edit entries? So let me show you an example we did with the Library of Congress. We were at the Association for the Centers for the Research of Congress. They had their annual conference, and they had asked, like, how can we help Wikidata? And most of these folks are academic institutions or presidential libraries, and they hold the archives of prominent senators, congressmen, and our ask of them as Wikidata and Wikipedia folks is, well, you could help us populate this little entry in Wikidata called archives at, just to tell us where the archives for Patrick Moynihan's writings are, or where the writings for certain congressmen are located, because we really don't know. Wikidata could use that information, right? So we said, try to fill these in for members of Congress, notable politicians, artists and creative, or anyone that you can find. This is something you folks could do as well, because I'm sure you hold a lot of these things. So here's an example of what we did with Tip O'Neill. The property is archives at, and then what we asked them to do is just add in, the institution, Boston College, Smithsonian, whatever the institution is, but then you can also add as what we call like qualifiers. This is kind of a second level set of detail, and we can say the finding aid is at this URL, right? So even this is really useful. Say Tip O'Neill's archives are at Boston College. That's already a good start, because I can go to Boston College Library and look for that. We even gave them the specific URL of the finding aid here. So this is what we call a qualifier that gives more detail there. Okay, so here's some stats that we ran real quick, saying that the archives at stats for the 12,691 items with a US Congress bio ID. So we looked through Wikidata and said, who has property 1157, meaning they have an identifier into the Library of Congress database. There's 12,691 of them, but only 44 had an archives at set, so it's not very comprehensive. And then probably most of those 44 were done by one or two people. So it seems like someone at the Manuscripts and Archives Department at Yale University Library just said, all right, I'm just going to go and seed all these folks I know where we have those archives, right? So 23 of those 44 were all set by the Yale University Library, because they probably had a librarian. I think we met the librarian who actually went in and entered all that information. Some of these are US presidents, right? So it's much easier to find, that they're in the US Presidential Library. But we said, Wikipedia may or may not have this info, but can you help us enter them in there? So that's what we asked them to do. And during our session, we had actually some people in the audience just go in on their laptops and say, hey, let's look up someone on the net that we know was a congressman and enter their information. So here's an example of how you do that. So this is a US Senator from Maryland, Phillips Lee Goldsboro. This is his record in the Library of Congress, and we can see that, it's kind of hard for you folks to see, that there actually is a record at the Library of Congress that says his writings are at Johns Hopkins, Maryland Historical Society, and University of Maryland. Right, so we know those three things. We don't have URLs, but at least those three things we know. So what we can do is go to the Wikidata item for Phillips Lee Goldsboro, and what we did, we find the person on Wikidata, right? So we found Phillips Lee Goldsboro. Oops, sorry, the arrows came in a little bit too early. And then after we found him, we pressed the add button right there. We added the archives at property, right? So the nice thing is when you drop it down, remember this is a very controlled vocabulary. There's only about 4,000 properties that have been approved by the community. So the nice thing is you don't just freeform add something. When you start typing, it'll start to fill in all the properties that are valid in Wikidata. And then once you've selected archives at, you can just paste in, well not paste in, but type in the institution. So you can see that here, archives at as a property says, whatever you put in here has to be an institution that we know of, right? It has to be an item that's in there. So that's the constraint that we have, that you can't just freeform enter any text. When you start typing in JOHNS, it looks through things and says, oh, Johns Hopkins University, and pops it up there, and you can just select it. So almost everything you do in Wikidata is kind of guided and directed. You add in Johns Hopkins, and then after 3 editions, this is what it looks like. So we actually did some research online. We went to Johns Hopkins, looked it up, and oh, here's the URL where that record is. Maryland Historical Society, we added the URL. University of Maryland College Park, we added that URL. Right, so that's a good example of how you can use this archives app to populate this, and now you have a full record of where those archives are located. Right.
Does the archives have to be in Wikidata first?
That's a good question. This organization here has to be in Wikidata already. So sometimes that's a problem. You're right. If it's a small historical society, it doesn't have a Wikipedia article or Wikidata item, you might have to go create the Wikidata item first before you can insert it. But that's a very common problem. That's a good question. So if it's a big university or big historical society, it's already set. But sometimes you kind of go down the rat hole. Like, I want to add this, but that doesn't exist. You have to add that, but that depends on that. And you have to keep going down, 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 and then climb back out to get it done. Yeah. Okay, so the great thing is once you add this into Wikidata, more and more of the information that you see in Wikipedia articles will be auto-generated from Wikidata. So the interesting thing is English Wikipedia being so big is actually at a first mover disadvantage. It's actually more conservative. It's basically saying, we got 5 million articles, we've existed fine, there's no reason to change anything drastically. The funny thing is these smaller languages are adopting Wikidata faster. Why? Because they don't have 10,000 people editing every month. They have only 50. So they really do want to glom onto Wikidata and say, yes, we want to generate more stuff out of Wikidata because we don't have the scores of editors that you have. Yes.
So I'm assuming we could do this at scale with, our data luckily across the Smithsonian is aggregated into the system. And it has, RFIDs in it. So we wouldn't have to individually go and put these in. We could,
right,
at some point, work with you to do a batch deposit or have an open API.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, so there are really good batch uploading tools. I'll show you one of them here, but then there's also, APIs that you can use to load up faster. Yes. But even if you're no more proficient than the average person with a spreadsheet, you're in good shape because you can basically take a spreadsheet, basically 3 columns, item, property, value, copy it, paste it, boom, it'll get into Wikidata. So we have tools that'll just do that. So if you can just handle a spreadsheet with 3 columns, you're good to go. And I've done it a lot. I've just laid out like 50 rows and just inserted 50 things in one shot there.
Do you get reports back, like about what failed? Like, I'm assuming it still goes through the automated checks on the data.
Yeah, it will give you failures. It will tell you whether things violate constraints. But in general, it'll try to ingest it. It doesn't really usually hard deny stuff if it can't help it. Yeah. Okay, so eventually more of this will be reflected in Wikipedia directly. So a lot of that stuff in info boxes that's edited by hand will just be generated out of Wikidata. So like I think Catalan, Wikipedia, some of the smaller ones are already just doing that en masse. Yeah.
And one question following up on that, so I assume that most Wikidata was coming from those info boxes, but you pointed out some things in the main part of the article. Can you show us a little bit about where it's getting things? Or is that not?
That's a good question. So info boxes are fairly limited in what they have. So what you have in info boxes tend to be things like, very hard start and stop dates, religion, where someone went to school, their spouse and their kids. And then other things in the body of the article might be more nuanced about, style of the painting, stuff like that. That's a little bit harder, but some people have tried to model that as well with Wikidata. But that's tougher. It really is. Yeah. All right, so perfect, Q. So alternative contribution methods. Instead of individual item pages, we have interesting ways of adding data, not only in bulk, but in using clicks to edit Wikidata. So the Wikidata game is pretty famous. We've been doing this with the American Art Museum. Allows for one-click contributions based on gigantic task lists, right? So this is a good example. There is a thing called mix and match. And what it does, it takes all these databases from art museums, thesauruses, dictionaries, encyclopedias, academic libraries, even like IMDb, Quora. And what it does, it says, give us your big database, and then we're going to line it up to Wikidata, and we're going to try to infer by looking at Wikipedia saying, I think your Mark Smith is this Mark Smith. We think. We're not sure. But what we have maybe a 70% confidence, we're going to put them next to each other, and if you could volunteer as someone who's editing to look at both things and say yes or no. And that's basically all this system does, is it takes a lot of the work out of researching. It basically says, with our algorithm, we have guessed that this person in this database is likely this person in our database. If you could just tell us yes or no, that would help us out a lot. And that's basically what you see here with what American Art has done, right? So they have this Smithsonian American Art Museum biographies, and you can see that the green thing is from Smithsonian, and the blue thing is from us, right? You can even see the Q number in tiny print right here. And it tries to give you as much as you can in one line, saying this person's born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania in 1945. This person, 1945, very likely it's the same person. So if you're being diligent, you would click on this, look at them and say, okay, they were both photographers, they're both born in the same place, they're both born the same year, probably the same person, right? So that's what this game called Mix and Match does. And you can actually choose from like dozens and dozens of databases out there to help out on. Right? So let me show you what one example looks like here. So we have one here is Christian Bouchard, Hamburg, Germany, 1955, German composer, 1946. I eyeballed this earlier. They are not the same person. So you would click on remove, and it would say, okay, remove from the list. So that has not been added to Wikidata yet. It's just that this is a candidate. The mix and match game says, should I make that connection? And you say no, hit remove. It's going to get rid of that. On the other hand, I looked here and say Santos Chavez, Chilean, graphic designer and painter. If I clicked on this, I think I remember seeing it, Sam. It didn't have any bio information, but had a woodcut etching. And this person, if I looked in here, was a woodcut artist and said, this is probably the same guy. So I hit confirm. And if you now look at the Wikidata item, you will see that an edit has been done to Wikidata on my behalf. You can see that it says created claim, Smithsonian American Art Museum, person, institution, thesaurus ID, 846. So it's connected Santos Chavez and Wikidata to 846 on Smithsonian American Art Museum biographical database. So that's kind of cool that connects that. Yes?
The 846 is what I do. Is that a Q?
It's
Or
not.
is
This is your, well, not
That's
your,
the-
but Sam's identifier.
Oh, that's their ID.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you get their data in there to match it?
That's a good question. I wasn't there for the technology part, but it was basically one big file. And basically, it was given to us on the back end, and then it was just processed, through a program or a bot to say, I'm going to look for clues in terms of birth date and name and keywords, and then it would try to match them. So I can show you what this looks like live, because it's kind of interesting. So if you go here and you say mix and match Wikidata, and any of you can do this, it's just a matter of making sure you have an account, because it does need to make sure that you are responsible for your edits. So pretty much anything on Wikidata, you can change as an anonymous individual. You don't have to log in, you don't have to create an account. But when it comes to this stuff, you can do so much massive scale of edits. They want to kind of know who's doing it, right? So you can see all the different folks we're looking at. Catholic Encyclopedia, Sandchart. I don't even know what that is. Women in Science. So you can see that some of these databases are completely done. Like volunteers have come on here and just, done this. You can even do this on your phone. It's so simple, right? You can actually be on your phone and hit yes, no, accept or decline, right? So let's go down here and we can see that the Smithsonian one is at the bottom here, somewhere. It's so long now. Okay, so you can see that we're about halfway done the Smithsonian, and what you can do is you can actually choose whether you want to, go with things that are completely unmatched, or you can say, let's just process the automatically matched ones and just help it out. All right, so you can see here some of the things that we talked about before. This Christian Burchard, I'm sure is not the right person. I hit remove, boom. It just removes it from the list. It doesn't do an edit to Wikidata because there's nothing to change, but just removes it from the list. But let's go ahead and take a look here. El Salvadorian football player. Let's see if there's a good match somewhere here. Does anyone recognize any names that would be a good match? Edward S. Ellis is very specific. Let me see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and open a tab there, open a tab here. Right. So I'm going to look at the Smithsonian one here. There's no bio there. This is the wood engraving on paper. What I have here in Wikidata is a nonfiction writer, unlikely. Let's see if there's a Wikipedia article for this person. You can see all those identifiers there. Let's take a look at this Wikipedia article. So it looks like there's nothing here that tells me that this was an artist, right? It was a writer, but not an artist.
I think
So,
it said he was a publisher.
and a publisher.
If you
Right?
go back to the sample.
Oh, is it publisher?
It says,
Ah, you're right. So it's not the artist. So it could be that he was the publisher, right? Does it say occupation? Just as author. Right. So you may have to do some more investigation here. It's not obvious, right? Let's find another one here. Does anyone see anything that matches? Yeah, this is very likely to be the same there, right? National Sculpture Society. So I would say that's a pretty good guess that it's the same. So let's go ahead and say confirm. And there it is. So now if I go to Wikidata and I look at my contributions, right? So if I'm logged in, I can click on this. You will see that that edit has been made on my behalf, and there's the number that was correlated right there. Okay.
is,
So,
is Sam taking back the Q numbers back to their data set? Do you know?
I don't think so, to my knowledge. Someone from SAM may know better. But once it's correlated in Wikidata, they don't actually have to copy back. They can just query Wikidata to find that relation. Right.
Yeah, but if I want to use their Q number now. You see, I want to.
You want to use Wikidata's Q number? Or?
Yeah,
Oh,
but if they've already done the matching, I
Yes.
want to then match against their match.
right, then you can go here and just take a look down at the bottom. And you can see that that's added right there. Now there's a constraint violation. Let's see what it says. Oops. The constraint violation says an entity with the source ID should have a sex or gender. So this is something that we probably have to change, in that when this was first created, it was the person ID. In fact, it's been expanded to be person or institution ID. So when it was added as a person ID, they said, oh, it's a person. You have to have a gender. You have to have this. You have to have that. Date of birth. No, because it's an institution now. So we probably have to go back and just kind of nudge the constraints and say it's a person/institution ID. It can have more breadth of variables there. So you're getting kind of an inside look at how this gets matched here. But this mix and match is kind of popular. You can actually go to the mix and match site and whoops, there actually is a scoreboard. So you can actually see how you're doing against other people if you're so inclined. But you know, it's not meant to be a competition, but it's kind of fun to see how many you've done compared to other people.
For those of us of competitive nature.
Yes, exactly. You never know what floats people's boat. They want to be at the top of the scoreboard. That's fine. Do more work, you'll be at the top of the scoreboard. But you can see that this list used to be just maybe 4 or 5 screens long. And you can see that there's so many data donations now that there's a lot more stuff to do. So a lot of sports databases have been added recently, right? So national sports databases are a big thing now in Wikidata.
What do you do in Wikidata if it's wrong? If the Wikidata data is wrong?
Fix it, delete it. Yeah, you should.
Am I allowed to delete
Absolutely.
Wikidata data?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, one of the things it's odd is if you've ever edited Wikipedia, when you make a change, you leave a little comment that kind of says, you know, I found out that this person didn't do that on this day. I'm leaving a note. One of the problems with Wikidata is by default you leave no comment.
Okay.
Every action you do is just saved right away, which can be a problem because you don't get a chance to explain your rationale for doing one action or another. Right? So that's still kind of a sore point in the community as to whether we should have edit comments when people make changes. It definitely slows things down, but it does allow you to leave kind of a record of why you're doing things.
So in the mix and match game, is there like a certain number of people that need to make the same confirmation or delete before you accept it?
That's a good question. I don't think so. If we had more participants and you were worried more about miscreants, you probably would say we need 2 accepts before we will make that change, right? But so far it's been very wiki-like in saying we kind of trust that you're here to do good work.
How has that worked? How has it panned out?
I think in general it's been pretty. One of the weird things is that mix and match is not very visible, so you'd only know about this project if someone else told you about it or that you're in the know. So there is that kind of that filter already saying that it's not on the front page of Wikipedia saying please help us out.
Go right in.
You kind of have to know that this exists. So most of the people who want to contribute and know that exists are pretty good at what they do. Yeah. So right now that's what where we're at with mix and match. Yeah, you don't want the 4chan crowd coming on to help us. Right? All right, so let's take a look at some other examples here of mass. Well, we'll look at some mass changes later on, but querying tools are what's really neat about Wikidata. So once you have that content in there, you can do cool things with what we call Sparkle, right? So Sparkle is the generic language for querying databases that use this kind of item property value system of RDF triple. It's called Sparkle with a Q, and then if you go to query.wikidata.org, you're faced with this big box that says, okay, now you can make any query you want. This is usually pretty intimidating, so there are a lot of sample queries. I highly encourage you to try out those sample queries first, and then just change those queries to your to what you want to look for. It's superficially similar to SQL, so if you know SQL, you kind of know about select and sort by this and group by that. So it's fairly simple to kind of map those concepts over with some big changes in how you think about things. But it's one of the busiest endpoints already on the internet. So what we call a site that provides this Sparkle service that you can query against, what we call a Sparkle endpoint. Wikidata has suddenly become one of the most popular ones on the internet. And you'll see why in a second. So this is an example of what a query looks like. It looks kind of weird and garbled, but this is to show all cats in Wikidata. I know, it's kind of weird, but all instances of cats, not like tigers and lions, like named cats, specific cats. So this is the instance of property, right? So it's an instance of, and this is cat. And you'll see that there's 116 results come back. I think it's way too low. There should be more famous cats in the universe than 116. But these are non-fiction cats. These are not Garfield. They're not, cartoon cats. These are real live cats, including like the former Socks the cat that Clintons had in the White House. So you can see here that this is simple. Just I'm looking for an item, which is an instance of a cat, and I want you to show me that item and the label and the name, basically, of that cat right next to it. Ignore this part for now. This is just something you'll always need to use when using Wikidata. As we said, the Sparkle language is very generic, so this part makes it Wikidata specific. Just always add that. Don't even look at it. Just that's the standard thing you add to every query. The cool thing is now that you brought those results back, this site, query.wikidata.org, can do really neat things if you return coordinates, if you return dates, if you return all kinds of cool things. You can actually make things like maps and graphs and tables, right? So here's a good example of where we worked with the Library of Congress folks to say, hey, let's take a look at where all the members of Congress went to school. Like, where were they educated at? It's kind of interesting, right? I really had no idea what we would find. You probably would guess the Ivy League universities probably dominate. But it's really interesting that over time, there's been ebbs and flows of different universities over time. So what we did was we created a query that says, let's look for all instances of humans, right? Q5 is human, right? So all the people who are human, that's kind of a weird thing to ask, but yes, there's a lot of things in Wikidata. First, got to say, this person's got to be human. We also find that it's got to have a Library of Congress bio ID, right? So this is property 1157, and we must find that this person has an entry in the Library of Congress bio database. So we know that's 12,000 some people. Then we also want to find out if they have educated at, which is property 69, set in their Wikidata item, right? Now this could be multiple things, right? Undergrad, law school, MBA, PhD, all these things, right? So we want to grab every single thing we can. It might be multiple entries per person. And then we want to count the occurrences of each school. So anyone who's ever used some kind of database language knows this is pretty simple to put out there. We want to order them from biggest to smallest or highest to lowest. And then we want to just see the top 15 results just to save time. We don't want to list all 100, 200 things. So that query, which I won't show you exactly what it looks like, but it's pretty simple. Looks like this. Just kind of interesting. So it's basically Harvard, 429, yes, Yale, 411, Princeton, 272. You're probably like, wow, that's not surprising at all. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, kind of boring. But Michigan was really interesting, right? Michigan at number 4, a public university, number 4. And it's probably because for the longest time when the US was only yay big, anyone who was anyone not on the East Coast went to Michigan for law school. And that's pretty much true from what we saw. So that's pretty impressive. In fact, look at that, right there with Harvard Law School, University of Michigan, Harvard Law School, Dartmouth, pretty expected, Columbia, Georgia. Then look at this. And we said, how many people heard of Union College before? Wow, that's great. Because very few people, when we did this, heard of Union College, but you probably were expecting Union to be like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Union. It's kind of funny, right? So we dug a little bit deeper and we said, let's refine this search. Let's go down and take a look. Why is this so high? Because very few people go to Union College anymore. So we looked in and said, if you look back on the history of colleges in the US, there used to be the big four universities or colleges, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Union, which is really surprising. It's connected to New York. And what we found is that it lost ground amid a financial scandal in the mid-1800s, and then a lot of the students were lost to go fight the Civil War. So if you look at this through a query, we basically just added one more statement here, which basically said not just what school they go to, let's say people who went to Union College specifically, and let's see when they were born and plot that on a graph. Okay, so what do? We take a look at Union College, and we found all these people who served in Congress, and we plotted them on a graph. And what do we find? Look at that, that's pretty dramatic, right? So it shows you that there's really great stories in Wikidata that you don't know about, but if you can do the right query, if you can use the right tools, and this does it right off the bat. If you just do the search and you have a date in a column, you just hit the timeline button, it'll make a timeline automatically for you, like this. It's really nice. So you can see that Union College was this, and I said, well, how about Columbia University? Now, if you want to read deeper, there's a really interesting history between Columbia and Union College. And you will see that Columbia actually was not as influential in its early years, but was really influential after the Civil War, right there. So you can see that that scandal really had a big impact. And look at how many members of Congress came from Union after that point. Very few, right? And Columbia just kind of kept going and going and going right there. So really interesting stories that you can just find right away from the data if you can form a query. Okay, so the impact of this is really interesting. So Wikidata was so successful that Google actually has closed down its own open data, public-facing open data project. So some of you might have heard of Freebase. It was a project started by Danny Hillis, kind of in the same mold of Wikipedia. Google bought them, hoping to further that, and they basically said, well, Wikidata is doing it much better. In fact, Google funded a lot of what has happened with Wikidata through development funds and everything. So they basically said, Wikidata is doing it much better. We don't need to do this project anymore. And now they're using Wikidata for a lot of their back-end knowledge graph work.
I want that to settle in in this room, right? That would be a great place for Smithsonian data. So.
Yeah. To the point where no one else has really thought of storing all that anymore, because Wikidata is so effective at doing it and so public. And what's really amazing is that the Sparkle endpoint that anyone can query. You don't have to log in, you don't need a token, you don't need a cookie. You can just hit it, and it has stayed up while millions of people have been hitting it. So it's pretty amazing that it's scaled in size too. So I thought I'd just leave you with some interesting Wikidata tools. This is where a lot of the fun begins, is that once you have all the stuff in Wikidata, you can bulk upload it, you can edit individual entries. There's all kinds of neat tools that you can run. So the Wikidata query we told you about before, Wikidata Graph Builder, I'll show you an example in a second. It's kind of neat. You can actually map out complete ontologies with Wikidata Graph Builder. It's kind of cool because it's kind of hard to get the 10,000-foot view of how things are organized there. Monumental is one that might be interesting to Smithsonian folks. It kind of tries to show you all the monuments that are in Wikidata and Wikimedia Commons, so all the things that are part of the National Historic Register of Places, and that's pretty cool to display all those things. Looking at an individual Wikidata page is kind of like looking at a bare bones description of something. So we have tools like Reasonator, which kind of show you all the things it knows about a Wikidata item in one shot. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. And then a tool called VizQuery. So if that Sparkle syntax kind of intimidates you, it's much easier to use something like VizQuery. And then the cool thing about Wikidata is now we can get some really interesting stats about gender gap. So some of you probably heard that the sad state of affairs in Wikipedia is only about 15% of all biographical entries are about women. That has actually gone up from 14.9 to about 17% now. That's really a great thing to see that move the needle. But you can see that this is kind of non-uniform, right? So if we people born from 1900 to 1909, only 11% of those bios are about women, but you can see in recent years it's actually gone to a quarter and rising. In fact, if you look at the numbers beyond this, it's starting to approach 50%. So that's kind of good that we have more and more representation here, and hopefully we can get to the point where it's not a big problem anymore. All right, so if you're going to try Sparkle, I highly suggest you click on the examples button. I still do this every time I do a query. I always choose one of these to base it off of. Cat is number one here. So you click cat, and then you just customize it. Right now it says instances of cats. You can say instances of dogs. You can say instances of medical researchers. You can do whatever you want. But this gives you the basic structure for doing your Wikidata queries.
Where do you get your P?
Where do you get your P?
Yeah.
That's a good question. So what happens is when you type in something here, you can type in an English language phrase, you hit Control Space, and it'll try to fill in things for you, right? So let me give you a look here at what this looks like. So I go to query.wikidata.org. There is my blank screen. It's going to be really intimidating to you. You choose examples, and you can go to cats. It'll fill that in right there. Let me just run that just to make sure you know that cats come back. Yes, 116 cats. But now let's say I want to change, not cats, I put my mouse on top, it says cat. I can delete that, and I can just type in, let's say, horse, like that. Now you're wondering, like, well, what do I do now? You hit Control Space, and it actually gives you all these options there. All right, so I'm going to say, let me see all the horses, Q726, run that. What is your guess? More or fewer horses than 160? More, like race horses, right? So, wow, yeah, 2,687. Right, so these are distinct instances of horses that are named and are famous enough to be in Wikidata. And it makes sense. You race horses, you don't race cats, typically. Yes?
So just a question about the Smithsonian entry.
Mhm.
There was a long list for subsidiary.
Yes.
But then a short list for, it's just an interesting, since we're familiar with it.
Right.
Has part of. So Smithsonian Library is a National Air and Space Museum, has part of being
Right.
the qualifier. And then the subsidiary had a lot more
Yes.
entities in it.
And that's a great example of how we haven't really made up our mind yet, like which is the best way, like subsidiary, part of. Yeah, it's a good question. So what I was going to do is ask you folks to help make one more definitive than the other. Let me show you an example. So I'll show you just a few shots here. This is Reasonator. It just takes a Wikidata item and tries to show you everything it knows about this item. So not just that very bare bones view, but it'll try to bring up the picture. It'll give you all the identifiers. It'll try to expand like who the parents are, who the siblings are, and all these other relationships. It's kind of cool. So this is called Reasonator. And I have links to all these in my slides. This is another one called Squid, which is very similar, trying to expand everything it knows about Smithsonian, for example. Like it says there's 30 million visitors per year known in 2012. I think it has to go up to like 31 by 2016, something like that. So these are just what it knows about the organization. And then there are things like timelines. So you can actually make timelines based off of Wikidata queries. So if you go to Wikidata timeline, there's prepackaged queries here. And then there's a distributed game. So there's another game here which helps you match up ethnicities. So there's lots of Wikidata items where they don't know the ethnicity of the person, but we have a pretty good clue from the Wikidata article, the Wikipedia article, where it says, the first African-American golfer to hit, this amount of this score. So it's very likely that will imply that the Wikidata item should say African-American as an ethnicity, right? So there's a whole game they set up for Black History Month to try to match up those entries on Wikidata.
I have a question.
Yes.
In your Reasonator,
Mhm.
okay, you showed all the stuff. So if my main language is Swahili,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I have chosen Swahili, so it all comes up in Swahili.
Hopefully.
Okay,
Yeah.
hopefully. Now my question is there any point at that point to turn, if I'm someone in Swahili who's very interested in it, to turn that into a Wikipedia article? Or is the data what I'm actually after?
Good question. I mean, what you can do is have the Wikidata fill in, like, let's say 40-50% of the bones of the article. Then the actual written prose you'd have to fill in, but it is already supplying you, let's say if it's a biography, of the person's birth date, location, all that stuff. Hopefully it will give the scaffolding to write prose better. Because right now you kind of have to look at another Wikipedia article and just kind of shovel it over
Yes.
to there,
Uh-huh.
right? But now if you have it all centralized in Wikidata, you can generate those information boxes and allow those things automatically.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of the motivation for a lot of Wikidata. Yes.
So we have a lot of stuff. What do you, what is the scope of Wikidata? Do you want everything? Because we can give it to you.
Right.
I don't know if you want it. Like, where's the limit of what your interests are for Wikidata?
That's a great question, and it's constantly being debated. There's no definitive answer to that. Like, wait, right. At what point do you say, yes, we want to suck up all your stuff by value, or what do we want to point to by reference? Like, do we want to just have an identifier and your database updates itself? I think the general impression, and Diane and other folks, let me know if you have heard otherwise, is federation. Right, is we don't need to replicate everything. In fact, it's bad if we replicate everything because we will have stale data. Like if you're going to be keeping your data fresher, it's more advantageous to everyone to just point with identifier to your fresh data. On the other hand, if it's an organization that's crumbling and dying and they want to donate their data before they go down the tubes, then copying makes sense.
So more of it's like less specific, like let's say a particular specimen. You don't want like all the specimen information because we already keep that in our database fresh, but our instance of this dig site has this identifier and
Right.
this curator has this identifier. Like making the connections into our things to help link it out, but not necessarily all the
Right.
physical content values at the teeny tiny nuance level.
Right. I think that makes sense. And if it makes sense to import that to do more things within the Sparkle engine or the RDF engine that we have, that might make sense. But if you're supplying that content through some kind of RDF system, then we can kind of just write a Sparkle query that hits us and your database and that database, and it just brings it all together. So I believe that SAMS is fully an RDF endpoint.
So if we had our own Sparkle endpoint, let's say,
Right.
then we could be maintaining that data in the RDF and then just connecting to you in
Yes.
some way within the Wikidata.
I think that's the way that I've seen things go, is that if you are highly proficient and you're keeping your data fresh and you're maintaining your endpoint and your endpoint is reliable and stays up and can scale, then I think that's the preferable way to go, is not to replicate everything, is to point to you.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay, good.
So we're reaching the end
Oh, yes.
of your time with us.
Should-
We have this room until 1:45.
Okay.
So I know some people have commitments and feel free to leave at this point if
Right.
you need to go.
So maybe we'll just spend the last 5 minutes to do the hands-on real quick, just to give you some experience, right? Okay, great. So this is, I thought I'd just show you this one thing, then we'll do the hands-on. So consider this query to find all museums in DC. It's fairly simple. It basically says, find all instances or subclasses of museums in DC, and if you have the coordinates, give it to us. If you have the date it was founded, give it to us. If you have the number of visitors per year, give it to us. And if you have the image, give it to us. So these are all optional things, like I hope you can give it to us. But you might get something like this. It's kind of a patchwork quilt, right? So you got Anacostia Community Museum, you've got the National Building Museum, you've got your museums here. Here's the coordinates, here's the image. Some things we have stats on, some things we don't. But the cool thing about this is once you have this table, you can kind of tell Wikidata query, show it to me in map form, timeline form, bubble graph. So you get all these options from that one query by just selecting something from this menu. So if you want to say, show it to me on a map, it's going to take all those coordinates and plot on a map. If you have the timeline option, it's going to take that inception date and graph it on there, which is kind of cool. This is a bubble chart of how many visitors per year each museum gets. So it's incomplete. Like I think it's only for like the 10 or 12 most popular museums, but it'd be great to get it for everyone. But you can see that Air and Space Museum, Natural History, I'm getting National Gallery of Art. So these are all museums in DC. And then this is just an image grid of all the pictures of the museum. So this is like really amazing if you think about how much you can do with just the query, and the tool does all this for you automatically. So that's what I want to show you as an example that you can try to build on. And I'm happy to do more of these kind of sessions if we want to plumb down to specifics of some of these things. So let me show you what the hands-on editing that I want you to do is. First, I want to see if we can, oops, I shouldn't say part. I should have changed this to parent organizations. I don't want to make that part of, I want to say parent organization. So if you go to your web browser, and go to the Smithsonian Institution article, on Wikipedia. Okay, it's pretty simple. Go to the Smithsonian Institution article, and then you should try to find that item you probably never clicked on before down there called Wikidata item right there. Okay, so after you go to the Smithsonian Institution Wikipedia article, on the left-hand side in the bar, click on Wikidata item, and then you'll see this navigation box at the bottom there. Okay, so at the very bottom of the article, you will see that this is a navigation box where someone or a bunch of people have curated this really nice, succinct view of all the museums, research institutions, and other parts of the Smithsonian. This may not be 100% perfect according to your org chart, but this is what Wikipedians have decided to put down here. And most of these don't have parent organization Smithsonian Institution. Most of them. I think only 4 or 5 of these do. So what I want you to do is choose one of these at random, whether it's your, or it can be your organization, or it could be someone that you know in a different organization. Click on that article, bring up that article of that museum or that research institution. Go to that Wikidata item, and I want you to go ahead and try to add parent organization Smithsonian Institution. You can also, the 5 is kind of optional. There hopefully is a description, but there may not be. So let me show you what this looks like. So I'm going to go to,
I have a question.
yep,
You said over on the right left is Wikidata item.
Mm-hmm.
That's not visible on
It's
the
up,
mobile.
it's up
That's
pretty
it.
high now.
It's where is it?
It's up pretty high on the tool thing. Just
oh, right here?
find
For
it.
mobile? Like it doesn't, I
Oh,
can't find
okay.
it anywhere on the page.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
That whole bar is not there for some reason.
Oh, that's right. So on a mobile, you might have to scroll down to the bottom and hit desktop. Like there's a mobile version and a desktop version. That's right.
Ah, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, good.
So,
Well, here.
Where's that?
Okay, so let me show you what this might look like. I'm at Smithsonian Institution. I'm going to go down to the bottom, and you're going to have this navigation box here, right? The one with the beige color right there. So I'm going to go to the Freer Gallery. So I click on Freer Gallery, and then I will click on the Wikidata item here. So this is the Wikidata item, and I notice that does it have parent organization? It doesn't, see? So it has a lot of descriptions, but it doesn't have parent organization. So what I'm going to do is going to go down here to the bottom. It's a little confusing, but I hit add right there. And I'm going to type in parent org, and see, it fills it in right there. I hit return, and then now what I put, I'm going to go ahead and hit Smithsonian. There it is. And then I hit save. And now I have added that to Wikidata. And you don't have to log in, you don't have to prove who you are, and we basically want that parent organization Smithsonian Institution to be added for each and every one of these folks, if you can. And more, right, there's even more, right? There's all these little organizations, right? So that's why, whether it's parent organization, part of, or subsidiary, sometimes is a little bit complex. Like subsidiary might have a very legal definition, right? So subsidiary might have like a tax implication or something like that. So when you say a parent organization, that might be a better description, right? Depends. And it depends on what you want it to be characterized as, right? So another question also is, Folkways is under folk life, culture, and heritage, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe the parent organization of this should be that and not Smithsonian, right? So you can model that as a hierarchy of, the parent organization of this is Smithsonian, but the parent organization of Folkways is this. And that's a transitive property. This is a parent of this, this is a parent, well, that is a parent of this is a parent of that. So it can actually transfer like that. So go ahead and try to find a few there, like Cooper Hewitt design. Let's take a look there.
Smithsonian has physical territory.
And then,
I just added it.
You just added it?
yeah, so this one doesn't, so I'm gonna go ahead and add that again. Parent organization.
Thank you.
So then it shows up as subsidiary when you look at the page where they, like astrophysical
Or the Smithsonian page, it says subsidiary, and that's where it's in.
Right, they might have modeled the
Different.
inverse of parent organization is subsidiary.
Okay.
That might be what the model says.
Yeah.
It says parent organization.
So we can edit some more of these, but for those who have to go, it was fun. Feel free to get in touch if you have any other questions. So just double check.
Oh, you know, maybe maybe it's be published.
There should be no delay. You found an error?
Institution wasn't, it's really, it just said American Archives, Archives of American Archives. Clicked on it, and the article was Archives of American Archives. So if I was trying to edit it, to say Archives.
Oh, you mean right here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I never liked this abbreviation they had there.
Oh, they do that on purpose?
Yeah, they did it on purpose.
A lot of the highlights. Isn't that weird?
Well, I think they're trying to save space, but I think you should be true to the real name.
So even if you tried to edit that, it wouldn't allow him to?
No, you can, but I would say,
Special section of pages of possibilities being incorporated.
well, this one,
I made a change, it's just not reflecting the change yet.
this one, as long as you leave like a rationale to say, we never refer to it as American Art in our organization, it's always Archives of American Art. Right, it's ambiguous, right? You could argue that this is incorrect because it's ambiguous, because you're not sure whether it's this or that, right? I'm glad you think it's fun, 'cause a lot of people find it infuriating when they see erroneous information. So.
Got a question, on the Smithsonian Institution Wikidata page, down at the bottom, it says has part.
Right.
And that's where it has Smithsonian Institution Libraries and National Air and Space Museum. Is that the same thing as subsidiary?
No, it's different.
So it is a different.
And that's an incomplete model. So I wasn't sure whether we should keep going with has part, because in fact has part is meant for like objects, not for organizations.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So I wonder who put them in there.
I
So
know.
they should be moved.
They probably should have removed.
Yeah. And
But
it
we're not
has
the only ones who use has part. Like some folks will say, you know, General Motors has part, you know, a subsidiary.
And they sell off that part.
Yeah,
Like that.
exactly.
So what happens when you have two key concepts that have been determined to be the same one? Do they get merged? Does one subsume the other and that Q number is now released back in the
Right.
wild, or is it retired?
If you agree, they'll be merged. I mean, there's usually a debate in the community whether this concept from this branch is the same as this concept from that branch.
Right.
But it's tough. Sometimes you will have irreconcilable differences. They'll kind of stay separate.
Right.
Yeah.
But do
They
they,
get busted by somebody.
does one get pushed preferentially over the other, or like, let's say I link my data to your Q7, but now you say Q17 is the right one?
There are ways in the description to say there's a synonym for this, like say also known as, and you can point to another one, or you can also say not to be confused with, and then to say you're separate from that. So there are ways to kind of say we're going to coexist, but we want to still relate to each other somehow.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of like, you have two Sparkle endpoints that are talking to each other,
Right.
like where changes in the data affect each other.
Right.
Like, are you breaking those connections that you're making, or are you able to self-healing in an automated way?
Right, not self-healing. Fortunately, the community is pretty small and pretty thoughtful right now, that we haven't had big knockdown, drag-out fights about this, but we probably will.
Okay.
Because you always will when it comes to classification, right? But it's,
Just thinking like,
if you get in early, it's more interesting. And you can determine some of the norms going forward.
new stuff in the.
it's just that line of like, what do we serve, what do you serve, and how do we keep those?
More of the same right now.
Like after you go
So
through all that work
sometimes
of
always a slow climb
linking,
around.
you know, it's not just data, it's also linking data,
And
that whole
we
infrastructure,
always need
trying to
new
keep that
things. So we had kind of a, like for
without
example,
like
Archives of American Art, we
constant, the hell that
have
is.
working our way through even something linear feet. So respondents still have curators, reports, coming we did a colleagues back over there. We did a pilot project with paleobiology, transcribing some samples from fossil marine animals. That was only 100 records, and even as we get this an issue worked out with how the extract is working from the records, then we should have about 600 more records, and then that whole thing is the pilot. This fall they'll start production, every week pushing news that direction. So those are some things that are exciting on the horizon, but it's a bit of a sustained time period. I mean, it's still chugging along. I would really love,
The relationships.
you know, anyone wants to bring things forward, always ready to be heard, you know.
Or you're not sure yet.
Sometimes it's challenging because I think these lulls coordinate with when staff is you know, doing their own professional development or preparing, digitizing and preparing collections or cataloging things.
Claire and Dave.
What about you? How's everything going? Anything new?
Not really. So I'm just like, what am I gonna do about this? But we at least we only have like 10 minutes each.
Yeah.
So, and I just need to sign up for the train from New York.
That's very interesting. I know you mentioned that earlier.
This way, it's not this way. Because it's like, this data has this information, and then that follows it all around, but it doesn't like fly, and say, we don't have that together yet.
So from one queue,
There isn't that. The source of, the 64 Oklahomas, that reconciliation, or 84 Oklahoma, like that is not. Yeah. That would be, this would be something else.
Let's see if Ulan is connected.
Yeah, they all have the same.
working on the project.
That's what I think should happen in a central place, every institution, where everyone can throw their stuff. Well, yeah, but it doesn't have to be the author, it doesn't have to be the author's form, it just needs to be.
Yeah.
So that's the part of the difference, is authority control, they go, no, you're gonna call it Alexander Cullen, I'm gonna call Cullen Alexander. It's like, I don't care.
That's the benefit of writing we can call it.
Yeah.
Then for too long it was like, oh, text string is okay.
No,
So there's no other option except besides using a Q value. That's fine.
And if they've got a portal and a system with a game, we should make it, so it's on there.
Same relationship to using might be more one.
We should, I mean, when, well, this is last year, we did some launching, so it was really tough. We were talking with Flora from your communications office about doing something, like I think.
There's gotta be like.
Your second floor with the big red rooms in it, so it wasn't ready yet for doing anything.
Because like otherwise we're
We've
like,
got tons
we're
of
using like
cool
old
Wikidata
language they
stuff
don't like
ready to
anymore.
speak German. Like, I got all this stuff ready to do in Wikidata, where you know better than I do, but there's a number of folks in Tuskegee that are Haitian, and they're kind of modeled in Wikidata, but not really. There's a great, one of my examples up there was the Great Day in Harlem photo. Like every single person in that photo is listed on the Wikidata item for that photo. And you can kind of tell, you can do all interesting queries against it, like, you know, I think 56 or 58 people in that photo. And you can actually query it, say, how many of those people are alive right now? And it's only 2. And you can find that all through Wikidata queries. So there's really kind of neat stuff that we could do with that. But yeah, I'd love to have some kind of meetup with.
So the conversation started.
But it's kind of stalled for like 6 months.
Okay.
So if we can start with you folks, then that's even better. So.
Okay, so we're a digitization department.
Yeah, we have all the little.
I was wondering what information
have like all of our embedded
who at
organizations.
SIM put me in contact so we can kind of replicate what they did.
So Sarah Sider would be good. Yes, Sarah Sider is the one who's the lead. You can also get into Effie. Because Effie and Sarah are working together
Yeah, it would be
on
nice
the
to,
project.
like at least take the first step, like someone can always like.
Yeah. Okay.
Why is it secret? I'm finding that interesting.
Because it's,
Yeah, just to get that first wave.
worker bees who wanna just do it and
Right.
try it and play with it.
So it hasn't been put as a strategy thing yet.
One by one, you know, but we
No,
definitely
and
figure
anytime
out
you bring it
what-
up with anybody with central thing, they go,
Well, we need a white paper.
I don't know.
So is that how someone could like learn all the capabilities and get familiar with
I mean,
this?
Sarah's
Because I've
obviously
never
done
really
this
heard
before,
of
where they.
Of
have
what?
the big.
Like
it.
going
I'm
Do it
familiar with
ways
the
where you like create
Wikidata and all of
create
that, like,
creating
this is the first
records,
time.
you can make the
we need to do it again.
Yeah.
exist.
So how do we learn more?
Good question. So we need like 2.0 of this.
Yeah.
So this is just like dipping your toe in. Believe it or not, that's like information overload, but that's just dipping your toe. Then we gotta get into the whole, changing and modeling stuff.
Okay.
Which is interesting.
All right.
Well, this
Do you
was,
teach
I mean,
a
it
course
was
similar
such
to that
a
in
good
America?
response.
Not
I
around this
think, yeah,
modeling
we need to do a
stuff.
follow-up
That's
with
much
an
more
app,
like library
let's
science
try
and
this, everyone try that.
Ontologies, which in journalism we tend not to do.
So we'll do
We're
it.
too busy writing stuff to think
Later this.
deep.
So did we,
But I find
we
this much more
scheduled a
interesting
day,
in terms
right?
of, like, how do you
For
catalog
the
things
link
for
data.
posterity?
Yeah. Yeah, I have it on my
Well, we
calendar.
could start, I mean,
Whether
it
you
could
sent
be
it or not, I
like
don't know. I was in
individual things that we do.
overseas,
We've done one
so-
with Sam,
Yeah, I think.
with individual and the.
Rebecca did.
Were you sending it
Could
date out?
even do
Was that
like
what
a
we're
review
doing?
just to dedicate to one topic.
It's
And
on
use
there.
the
Too much
Wikipedia,
noise.
Wikidata
Did you send it?
content around it. So I
Am I
think
supposed
at
to
the
be
time, we're talking
Because
to,
you had, you said, tell me the date and then I'll send you.
yeah, Mary Ellen. too.
I had something
About
on my
doing
calendar. I don't know who sent it out, but.
Never found
I'm,
it.
I,
That might be good.
I was gone last week, my brain is gone,
What
so.
about
Ditto.
a supervisor? And-
That's
If
good.
you can remind
So
me
when
of the
else
date,
is that? I don't even remember the date,
Okay.
that's, I have no
It
idea.
was July,
Here's my-
I can check on my phone, hold on.
No, it's all
Yeah,
right.
we'll talk to Mary and Flora and say, hey, Andrew from American, like we last talked like last year about doing something. And she wanted to do something.
Okay, oh, I don't know, I made.
Your launch and everything
I
was
need
just
to count
over.
it. I don't know if I.
Mary's pretty busy. And we're more of the data team.
Alright, let me get my
So she'll probably have to
Blackberry
come
up
through us and get what she needs, so.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll work on something. So
Okay.
we can get together.
Good.
All right?
All right.
Thank you.
Good meeting you.
Good meeting you too. I'm Jared, by the way.
Oh, Andrew.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's your card.
sure. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Great.
I think ideally we'll have like a train-the-trainer sort of situation. of
Yeah, that makes
developing
sense.
a template, So we can like go to our individual museums and like show people like, this is it, and how you can do it, what should we be doing with it?
Yeah,
Right.
because I know our director recently, like this week, was talking about, we need to pump up the digitization side of things. And part of getting support for that is that people use the information that we already have out. So if we can use Wikipedia as a way of how to link them back to our websites, that will help us in our department.
Right. And soon, Wikidata will be used as the metadata for Wikimedia Commons. Right now, if you upload something to Wikimedia Commons, it's kind of sloppy metadata. It's clunky, yeah. It's basically just typing, text descriptions, but there's no way to search it. I mean, the search on Wikimedia Commons is terrible. So once you can handle metadata with Wikidata, all that power we saw
And I'll double check.
is now available for the millions and millions of images on Wikimedia Commons. In theory,
You guys gotta give me this stuff.
Yeah, because right now we use TMS for everything. And like, if you can get some of that information out, that curated research on, like, when this area, we don't have a lot of our collection from this area, then that can help the curators to find out where they need to go to curate.
Right, and so,
It's just so
I had
many
reminded, I was
possibilities.
looking at my reminders.
It's fantastic, just need to
Number
figure
of
out how
people
we can get our
versus
information
machine.
out of
What was the
TMS
question?
into Wikipedia, or Wikidata.
right.
Yeah, it's just the awkwardness of trying to decide how can we put our images out like in the Wikimedia Commons because there's all the licensing and copyright concerns and all that.
Like,
I
think it was sort of in the
world.
Yes.
I know someone that contacted me in September.
I was staring at
And I was
them.
thinking, I could put together a
Due to
list of
that
things already in
question.
public domain, and we can get that information out.
I'll
We have
reread the
other
proposal.
Right.
things in public domain.
That would help.
Yeah, okay.
I'll do that.
I think it was sort of like machine enabled